Hunter taunted a starving bear for laughs. What happened next left everyone speechless. The bear's jaw cracked open in a silent roar, revealing pink gums lined with broken teeth. And the hunter, still laughing, raised his rifle not to fire, but to film. The animal swayed on legs thin as birch saplings, its fur hanging in patches like torn fabric, ribs pressing through skin so tight it seemed the bones might pierce through. 40 feet separated them in a clearing carved by logging roads, the autumn ground littered with pine needles and the last rotting berries the bear had been too weak to reach. The man's laughter echoed against the tree line, a harsh sound that made the crows fall silent. He tossed a candy bar into the dirt between them and stepped back, camera raised, waiting for the creature to crawl forward in desperation. The bear did not move. Its eyes, small, dark, filmed with exhaustion, fixed on the man with an expression that transcended hunger. Not rage, not even fear. Something older. The forest held its breath. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this bond between these creatures has already touched you, tell us where you're watching from. To witness every act of courage, every impossible friendship, and every silent miracle of nature, subscribe and join our circle. The next moment will change everything. Now, back to the wild. Part 1. The Incident and the Proposition. The hunter's name was Viktor Demidov, though the bear would never know it. He'd driven 6 hours north from Petrozavskak into the Karelian wilderness, where the roads turned to mud and the cell towers disappeared behind walls of spruce. October had stripped the birches bare, and the first snow was perhaps a week away. Early enough that the bears should have been gorging themselves into torpor, packing on the fat that would carry them through the winter dark. But this year the berry crop had failed. The salmon runs had been thin. And the bears were dying. Victor was not a cruel man by nature. He worked in construction, had 2 daughters who called him every Sunday, and donated to the local church when he remembered. But out here, with no witnesses except the forest and a smartphone with a half-charged battery, something else emerged. The license to be careless. The license to forget that suffering deserved dignity. He'd found the bear 20 minutes earlier, pawing through an abandoned campsite near a nameless lake. The animal had been trying to open a plastic cooler left behind by fishermen, its movements slow and clumsy, when Victor's truck rumbled up the trail. The bear had turned, startled, and that's when Victor saw how thin it was, how the spine curved like a string of beads beneath the matted fur, how it moved with the hesitation of something that knew its body was failing. And Victor had laughed. Not from malice exactly, from discomfort, from the same nervous impulse that makes people giggle at funerals or crack jokes in hospital waiting rooms. He'd grabbed his phone and started filming, narrating in Russian peppered with profanity. And when the bear didn't run, when it simply stood there, swaying, he'd grown bolder. "Look at this pathetic thing," he'd said to the camera. "Can't even run. Hey, hey, bear!" He'd thrown a stick. The bear flinched but didn't flee. "You want something to eat?" Victor rummaged in his pack and found a Snickers bar, still in its wrapper. He tossed it into the dirt. "Come on, dance for it." The bear watched the candy bar land. Its nostrils flared, pulling in the scent of chocolate and peanuts and sugar, calories its body screamed for. But it didn't move forward. Instead, it lowered its head, and for a long moment, Victor thought it might simply collapse. Then the bear sat down. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. It folded its hind legs beneath itself and sat in the dirt like a dog waiting for a command it knew would never come. Its front paws settled in the pine needles. Its eyes never left Victor's face. The hunter's smile faltered. There was something in that gaze that cut through the phone screen, through the joke, through the distance he'd created between himself and this dying animal. Not accusation, not even sadness, just recognition. The bear saw him, truly saw him, in a way that made Victor feel suddenly transparent, as if every petty cruelty, every careless word, every moment of weakness in his 43 years had just been laid bare in that clearing. "What?" Victor said aloud, defensive. "What do you want?" The bear didn't answer. It simply sat, breathing slowly, waiting. Victor lowered his phone. The clearing was quiet, except for the wind moving through the spruce tops and the distant call of a raven. The shadows were lengthening. He should have been heading back to his truck before dark. The logging road was treacherous, even in daylight, prone to washing out, and the forecast called for rain. But he didn't move. "Fine," he muttered. He walked forward, slowly, watching for any sign of aggression, and picked up the candy bar. The bear's eyes tracked his movement, but its body remained still. Victor unwrapped the Snickers and tossed it again, closer this time. "Eat it." The bear leaned forward, stretched its neck, and took the candy in its teeth with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a predator. It chewed slowly, mechanically, swallowed, then sat back and waited. Victor threw a granola bar, then a package of beef jerky, then half a sandwich he'd made that morning. The bear ate each offering with the same careful deliberation, never lunging, never rushing. Between each piece, it sat and watched him. "You're going to die," Victor said finally. The words came out softer than he'd intended, stripped of mockery. "You know that, right? You're too thin. You won't make it through winter." The bear blinked, a slow reptilian lowering of the eyelids, and Victor felt absurdly like he was being judged. He thought about leaving. He thought about raising his rifle and ending it quickly. It would be merciful, really, kinder than letting the animals starve or freeze. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the bear sat there with such patient dignity. Maybe it was the sudden, uncomfortable awareness of his own mortality reflected in those dark eyes. Or maybe it was simply the fact that for the first time in months, Victor felt seen by something that demanded nothing from him, except to be present. "He'll come back," he heard himself say. "Tomorrow. I'll bring food." The bear's ears swiveled forward, catching the sound of his voice. Victor backed toward his truck, keeping his eyes on the animal until he reached the door. The bear didn't follow. It remained sitting in the clearing, a dark shape against the golden afternoon light, watching him go. That night, in his cabin 15 miles south, Victor couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the bear's eyes, about the way it had sat with such strange dignity, refusing to beg. He'd posted a short clip to his social media, just 10 seconds of the bear swaying on its feet, with a caption about the failed berry crop and the harsh season ahead. The responses had been immediate and divided. Some people expressed sympathy for the starving wildlife. Others criticized Victor for getting so close. A few made jokes about dancing bears and circus acts. But one message stood out. It was from a wildlife biologist named Katya Orlova who worked with the Regional Conservation Department. "That bear is a female, probably 8 to 10 years old. If she's that thin in October, she's already past the point where she can safely hibernate. She'll likely die within 2 weeks unless someone intervenes. If you see her again, document it. And don't get any closer. Even starving, she's dangerous." Victor stared at the message for a long time. She, not it. The bear had become specific in his mind, individual, no longer just a representative of a species, but a singular creature fighting for her life in the final weeks before the snow came. He thought about his daughters, about the way they'd looked at him when his wife died 3 years ago, searching his face for assurance that the world was still safe, that he could protect them from the random cruelties of existence. He'd had no answers then. He'd held them and lied with his silence. At dawn, Victor loaded his truck with everything edible he could spare. A bag of dried fish, 2 loaves of bread, a container of leftover stew, 4 cans of tuna. He drove north again, the morning mist still clinging to the valleys. And when he reached the clearing where the logging road dead-ended, the bear was there. She was sitting in almost the exact same spot, as if she'd never left, or as if she'd returned at first light, hoping. "I came back," Victor said quietly, stepping out of the truck. The bear's head lifted. In the morning light, he could see just how skeletal she was, the skull too prominent beneath the fur, the shoulders sharp as axe blades. She should have weighed 400 pounds going into winter. She probably weighed 200. He set the food down in a pile 20 feet from his truck and stepped back. The bear rose, slowly, painfully, and approached. She ate without hurry, without the frantic gulping Victor had expected. She ate like someone who knew this might be the last meal and wanted to remember it. When she finished, she sat again and looked at him. And Victor understood in that moment that something had shifted between them. This was no longer a random encounter, no longer a joke to film and forget. This was a proposition, an unspoken agreement forged in desperation and witnessed by no one except the forest itself. He would come back, every day. Until the snow came, or the bear died, or whatever ending the wild had written for this story finally revealed itself. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll bring more tomorrow." The bear watched him drive away, a dark silhouette growing smaller in his rearview mirror, and Victor realized he was already calculating how much food he could afford to buy, how early he'd need to wake to make the drive before work, how he'd explain to his daughters why his grocery bills had suddenly doubled. He didn't have answers. He only knew that leaving her to die without trying felt like a betrayal of something he couldn't name. So he would return, again and again, into whatever labyrinth of instinct and conscience and stubborn hope this strange alliance would lead them both. The proposition had been made, and neither of them could walk away. Part 2. The Labyrinth of Instinct. For 6 days, Victor returned to the clearing at dawn. Each time, the bear was waiting. He learned her rhythms quickly. She emerged from the forest around sunrise, always from the northeast, where a game trail wound through dense spruce toward a swamp. She moved with the careful economy of an animal conserving every calorie, placing each paw deliberately, pausing often to rest. When she sat, and she always sat while he laid out the food, her breathing was audible even at 20 feet, a raspy wheeze that suggested her lungs were struggling. Victor brought everything: salmon he bought from the docks, expired meat from a sympathetic butcher, bags of dog food mixed with vegetable oil, even honey when he could afford it. The bear ate it all with the same patient thoroughness, never rushing, never showing aggression. After each meal, she would sit for 10 or 15 minutes, digesting, watching him. Then she'd rise and fade back into the forest like smoke. On the 3rd day, he tried to film her eating. The moment he raised his phone, she stopped mid-bite and stared at him until he put it away. After that, he left the phone in his truck. On the 5th day, a light snow fell, the first of the season. Victor arrived to find the bear already in the clearing, fur dusted white, and he realized with a start that she was sitting closer than usual. Not by much, maybe 5 feet, but enough that he could see the scars on her muzzle, the torn ear that suggested old battles, the way her left eye had a slight milkiness to it. "You're getting bold," he murmured, setting down a container of fish stew he'd made the night before. The bear's nose worked, pulling in the scent. For the first time, Victor saw something like eagerness in her movements. She ate the stew quickly, licking the container clean, and when she sat back, there was a change in her posture. Less defeat, more alertness. Maybe the food was helping, or maybe she was simply strong enough now to hope. But the forest had not forgiven her for surviving this long. On the 7th day, Victor arrived to find the clearing torn apart. Branches had been ripped from trees. The ground was churned with tracks, not just the bare small prints, but larger ones, deeper, belonging to something heavier. Blood spattered the pine needles in dark constellations, already freezing in the morning cold. And the bear was gone. Victor's heart hammered as he scanned the tree line. He called out, stupidly, as if she were a lost dog, then fell silent, listening. The forest gave back nothing but wind and the aggressive scolding of a jay. He followed the tracks. They led north along the game trail, the bear's prints staggering and uneven, flanked by the larger tracks of a male. A boar, Victor guessed, maybe 600 pounds, drawn by the scent of food or simply by the presence of a female in his territory. Male bears in autumn could be unpredictable, especially if they were hungry themselves. 100 yards in, Victor found where the confrontation had happened. A tree was scored with claw marks 10 feet up. Fur was caught in the bark, brown and black, 2 different bears. More blood. And then the tracks separated. The male heading west, the female continuing north, limping now, one front paw dragging. Victor stopped. He was armed, the rifle slung over his shoulder. But he was also alone, deep in wilderness that could kill him a dozen different ways. And tracking an injured bear into thick cover was monumentally stupid. But he kept walking. He told himself he just needed to know if she was alive, if she'd survived the fight. Had come this far, he couldn't turn back without knowing. The trail led him deeper into the forest, away from the logging road, into stands of old growth where the spruce trees grew so close their branches interwove overhead, blocking the sky. The snow was heavier here, untouched, except for the bear's tracks. Victor's breath plumed in the cold. His fingers were numb. And then he found her. She was lying beneath a deadfall, a massive spruce that had toppled years ago and now formed a shelter between its trunk and the earth. She'd crawled underneath, into the darkness, and curled into herself. Her breathing was labored, each exhale visible as steam in the frigid air. Victor approached slowly, rifle ready. "Hey," he said softly, "it's me." The bear's head lifted. One side of her face was matted with blood, a gash across her shoulder, claw marks raked down her side. She watched him with that same patient gaze, but now there was something else in it, pain, and perhaps resignation. She'd fought, she'd survived, but it had cost her. Victor crouched 10 feet away, far enough to run if she charged, close enough to see the rise and fall of her ribs. "You can't stay here," he said. "It's too cold. You need to eat." The bear closed her eyes. For a long moment, Victor just sat in the snow, his rifle across his knees, watching her breathe. The forest was utterly silent. No birds, no wind. Just the two of them in a cathedral of frozen trees, caught in some drama neither had chosen, but both were now bound to see through. He should leave. He should let nature take its course. That's what Katja, the biologist, would say. Intervention was complicated, risky, often did more harm than good. The bear was wild. Her survival or death was not his responsibility. But Victor thought about the way she'd sat in the clearing that first day, refusing to beg. He thought about the proposition they'd made, unspoken but binding. And he realized that walking away now would break something in himself he didn't want broken. "I'll be back," he said. "I'm going to get help." The bear didn't respond. She might not have even heard him. But Victor stood, marked the location carefully in his mind, and began the long hike back to his truck. He drove south with his foot pressed to the floor, the truck skidding on the muddy logging road, and when he finally had cell service, he called Katya Orlova. She answered on the third ring. "This is Orlova. It's Viktor Demidov, the guy with the bear. She's hurt. A male attacked her. She's bleeding, and I think she might die if someone doesn't help." There was a pause. "Where are you?" "North of Lake Quito, maybe 30 kilometers into the forest." "Victor." Her voice was careful, professional. "You need to understand that we can't. I'm not asking for a rescue mission. I'm asking what I can do, how I can help her." Another pause. Then, "Is she mobile?" She was. "She's sheltering now under a deadfall." "If she's still moving, she has a chance, but she needs calories, a lot of them, and she needs to avoid infection. Can you get antibiotics?" "Where?" "There's a veterinary clinic in Kostamuksha. Tell them you need a broad-spectrum antibiotic for a large animal. Don't mention it's a bear. Say it's for a farm dog. And, Victor, be careful. Injured animals are unpredictable. Even if she's been docile, pain changes everything." Victor thanked her and hung up. He drove to Kostamuksha, lied to a tired veterinarian who clearly didn't believe his story about a sick dog, but sold him the antibiotics anyway, and bought 100 pounds of meat and fish from 3 different stores. By the time he returned to the forest, it was late afternoon. The shadows were long and the temperature was dropping. He found the deadfall again, his earlier tracks already half buried in fresh snow. The bear was still there, still curled in the darkness beneath the fallen tree. Her eyes opened when he approached, reflecting the dim light like coins. "I brought food," Victor said, "and medicine. I don't know if you'll take it, but I'm going to try." He set the meat down just outside the deadfall, close enough that she could reach it without leaving her shelter. Then he cracked open a capsule of antibiotics and mixed the powder into a container of fish paste, stirring until it dissolved. "This will help," he said, placing the container beside the meat. "Please eat it." The bear watched him, unmoving. Victor waited. Minutes stretched. The cold seeped through his boots, his gloves. He began to lose feeling in his toes. And then, slowly, the bear extended her neck. Her nose touched the container. She licked it once, tentative, then began to eat, lapping up the medicated paste with her tongue. When it was gone, she pulled the meat closer and ate that too, tearing chunks with her damaged teeth, swallowing without chewing. Victor felt something release in his chest. Not relief, exactly, more like the loosening of a fist he'd been clenching since morning. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." He stayed until she finished eating, until she retreated back into the darkness of the deadfall and closed her eyes. Then he marked the trees nearby, scoring the bark with his knife so he could find the location again, and began the hike back to his truck. For the next 4 days, Victor made the journey twice daily, once at dawn, once at dusk. Each time, he brought food and fresh antibiotics. Each time, the bear ate, slowly regaining strength. The gash on her shoulder closed. The blood stopped. And on the 4th day, when Victor arrived at sunset with a bag of salmon, he found the deadfall empty. His heart sank. Had she died? Wandered off to collapse somewhere he'd never find her? But then he heard a sound behind him, a soft huff of breath, and turned to see her standing at the edge of the clearing, watching him. She was still painfully thin, still moving carefully, but she was standing on all 4 legs, weight evenly distributed, and there was a clarity in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "You're up," Victor said, his voice cracking slightly. The bear took 2 steps forward, then stopped. The distance between them was maybe 15 feet, closer than she'd ever been. Victor's hand instinctively moved to his rifle, then stopped. She wasn't threatening. She was just there, present. He set down the salmon. She approached, ate, and when she finished, she sat. The familiar posture, the patient waiting. Victor sat too, right there in the snow, his rifle beside him. They watched each other as the sun set and the first stars emerged, and for reasons he couldn't articulate, Victor felt like they'd crossed some threshold together, like the bond between them had been tested and had held. "We're going to get you through this," he said finally. "I don't know how, but we will." The bear's ears swiveled toward the sound of his voice, and in the gathering darkness, Victor could have sworn she understood. Part 3. The Revelation and the Fracture. The first hard freeze came on a Tuesday night, dropping temperatures to -15 Celsius and coating every surface in ice. Victor woke at 4 in the morning to make the drive north, his truck's heater struggling against the cold, and when he reached the clearing, the bear was pacing. It was the first time she'd seen her truly agitated. She moved in tight circles near the deadfall, stopping every few steps to look toward the northeast, toward the game trail and the swamp beyond. Her breath came in rapid puffs. Every few minutes, she'd emit a low moan, gutturally pained, and Victor's stomach tightened with worry. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping out of the truck. The bear barely glanced at him. She was focused entirely on the forest, her body tense with an urgency Victor couldn't interpret. He set down the food, 2 fresh fish, a container of fat-enriched dog food, a honeycomb he'd bought from a beekeeper, but she ignored it. She paced, moaned, looked toward the trees. And then Victor heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind, a high-pitched cry, fragile and desperate, coming from the direction the bear kept watching. His blood went cold. "No," he breathed, "you didn't." But even as he said it, he knew. The signs had been there. The way she'd guarded the clearing, the specific direction she always disappeared, the fierce desperation in those first encounters. This bear wasn't just fighting for her own survival. She had a cub. The revelation hit Victor like a physical blow. All this time, all these weeks of feeding her, of coaxing her back from the edge of starvation, he'd been trying to save not one bear, but 2. And he'd had no idea. "Where?" Victor demanded. "Where is it?" The bear turned to him finally, and in her eyes, Victor saw pure anguish. She knew he couldn't help. She knew the cub was too far, too hidden, too fragile to move. But the need to go to it was tearing her apart, warring with the knowledge that leaving now, before she'd regained her strength, might mean dying on the trail and abandoning the cub anyway. Another cry drifted through the frozen air, weaker this time. The bear made a decision. She turned toward the game trail and began to walk, ignoring the food, ignoring Victor, moving with purpose despite her still evident limp. Victor didn't think. He grabbed the bag of food and followed. "Wait, you need to eat. You're not strong enough." She didn't wait. She moved steadily into the forest, and Victor found himself jogging to keep up, the rifle banging against his back, his breath burning in the cold air. The bear led him along the game trail, then veered off into thick underbrush where the snow was knee-deep, and every step was a struggle. Branches whipped Victor's face. His boots broke through ice into hidden pockets of water. But he kept following, driven by the same desperate urgency he saw in the bear's movements. They traveled for nearly 2 kilometers. Victor lost track of time, focused only on not losing sight of the bear's dark shape moving through the white forest. And then she stopped at the base of a massive pine, its lowest branches sweeping the ground, and pushed through the curtain of needles. Victor hesitated, then followed. The space beneath the branches was a small cave of darkness and dry needles, and there, curled against the trunk, was the cub. Victor's heart broke. It was impossibly small, maybe 30 pounds, barely 3 months old, its fur still fuzzy with youth. One of its eyes was sealed shut with infection. Its breathing was shallow and rapid. When the mother approached, the cub tried to lift its head but managed only a weak mewling sound before collapsing back onto the needles. The mother bear lowered herself beside her cub and began to lick it with long, desperate strokes, trying to warm it, clean it, will it back to life through sheer force of maternal devotion. But even Victor could see it was dying. The cold, the hunger, the infection. It was too much. Victor knelt at the edge of the space, keeping his distance, and felt tears burn his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I should have." But what could he have done? Even if he'd known from the beginning, what resources did he have to save a bear cub in the wilderness? The antibiotics were for an adult. The food was meant for the mother. And any attempt to move the cub, to bring it to a facility equipped to help, would likely kill it from the stress. He'd been trying to save one life, unaware that he was failing too. The mother bear continued her vigil, licking her cub, nudging it, making soft sounds Victor had never heard from her before. A desperate, crooning moan that needed no translation. It was the sound of every parent in history begging an indifferent universe to spare their child. Victor opened the bag and pulled out the container of honeycomb. "Here," he said softly, setting it beside the mother. "You need to stay strong, for both of you." She ignored it. She focused entirely on the cub, and Victor realized she'd already made her choice. If the cub died, she would die beside it. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't leave. The proposition Victor thought they'd made, his food for her survival, had never been the real bargain. She'd been accepting his help only so she could keep trying to save her baby. And now, the baby was failing. Victor sat in the snow outside the pine branches for 3 hours. The temperature continued to drop. The weak sun arced across the sky without warmth. The mother never left her cub's side, and Victor never left the mother's. He thought about calling Katya, about somehow getting a wildlife rescue team out here, or a veterinarian, or anyone with more knowledge than he had. But his phone had no signal this deep in the forest, and even if he could call, what would he say? By the time help arrived, it would be over. So he simply bore witness. At some point, the cub stopped breathing. There was no dramatic moment, no final struggle. Its small chest simply ceased its rapid rise and fall, and the labored wheeze fell silent. The mother continued licking it for several minutes, as if unaware, until finally she stopped and rested her massive head across the cub's tiny body. The sound she made then would haunt Victor for the rest of his life. It was grief made audible, a low, keening moan that seemed to come from the earth itself, ancient and boundless and utterly beyond consolation. Victor wept openly, not bothering to wipe his face, not caring about dignity or strength or any of the armor men are taught to wear against sorrow. In that moment, beneath the pine tree in the frozen forest, the distance between human and bear collapsed into nothing. They were just two creatures sharing the same fundamental anguish, the same rage at mortality, the same helpless love that survives even when its object does not. After a long time, Victor spoke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have helped sooner." The mother bear lifted her head and looked at him. And in her eyes, Victor saw no accusation, just exhaustion, just the terrible knowledge that she'd fought and failed and would now have to carry that failure into whatever remained of her life. "You have to eat," Victor said, pushing the honeycomb closer. "You can't stay here. You'll die too." The bear looked at the food, then back at her cub. She lowered her head again, closing her eyes, and Victor understood that she didn't care about dying. What was survival without purpose? What was strength without something to protect? Victor stayed until dark. The temperature dropped to -20. His fingers were numb, his face aching from the cold. Finally, knowing he had to leave or risk freezing himself, he stood. "I'll come back tomorrow, in case you change your mind." The bear didn't respond. She lay with her cub in the darkness beneath the pine, and when Victor pushed back through the branches into the night forest, he left them there, mother and child, together in their grief, and began the long, stumbling journey back to his truck. He got lost twice. The forest at night was a maze of shadows and identical trees, and his flashlight battery died within an hour. But eventually, he found the logging road, found his truck, and drove home in a daze, his mind replaying the image of the cub's closed eyes, the mother's keening, the terrible finality of it all. When he reached his cabin, he sat in the truck for 20 minutes, unable to make himself go inside. His daughters would call tomorrow. They'd ask how he was, what he'd been doing, and he'd have to decide whether to tell them about the bear, about the cub, about his small, failed attempt to intervene in the vast machinery of nature. In the end, he decided he would tell them, because they deserved to know that their father had tried, that even in failure, even in heartbreak, the trying itself mattered. But first, he had to go back. The bear needed him more than ever now, and Victor had made a promise, even if it was already too late. Part 4. The Return and the Trial. Victor didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table drinking tea that went cold in the cup, staring at nothing, while images cycled through his mind. The cub's labored breathing, the mother's desperate licking, the final stillness. Around 3 in the morning, he called Katya Orlova. She answered with the groggy irritation of someone woken too early. "Victor?" "She had a cub. I didn't know. It died yesterday." Silence. Then, softer. "I should have warned you. Late-season cubs, when the mother is malnourished, they usually don't make it. She won't eat. She's just lying there with it." "Victor." Katya's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to let nature take its course now. The cub is gone. The mother will grieve, then she'll move on, or she won't. That's not your decision. So I should just abandon her? You shouldn't have gotten involved in the first place. But since you did..." She sighed. "Give her space. If she's going to survive, she needs to make that choice herself. Grief can be a death sentence for a bear this time of year, or it can be what pushes her to fight harder. You can't control which." Victor hung up without saying goodbye. He dressed in the dark, loaded his truck with more food than he could afford, and drove north while the stars were still visible. The clearing was empty when he arrived. The deadfall showed no signs of recent use. Victor hiked to the pine tree where he'd left the mother and cub, his heart hammering, expecting the worst. The space beneath the branches was empty. Both bears were gone. Victor stood in the circle of his flashlight beam, staring at the compressed needles where the cub had lain. No blood, no signs of struggle. The mother had moved the body, or left it, and disappeared into the forest. Victor searched for tracks, but the frozen ground held nothing, and the wind had already begun to erase the few marks left in the snow. She was gone. For 3 days, Victor returned to the clearing, to the deadfall, to the pine tree. He left food at every location. He called out, feeling foolish, his voice absorbed by the trees. The forest gave back only silence. On the 4th day, he found a kill site. It was 2 kilometers south of the clearing, in a small ravine where a creek cut through the permafrost. Something had taken down a young moose, probably wolves, judging by the tracks. But other tracks surrounded the carcass. The distinctive 5-toed prints of a bear, medium-sized, circling cautiously. The mother bear had scavenged here. Recently, within the last 24 hours. Victor's heart surged with hope. She was alive. She was mobile, and most importantly, she was eating. He followed her tracks south, away from the clearing, deeper into territory he didn't know. The forest changed around him, less spruce, more birch and aspen, the undergrowth thicker. The tracks led him across frozen streams, through stands of deadfall, over ridges where the wind had swept the snow bare. And then the tracks ended at a cliff. Not a dramatic precipice, but a sharp drop of about 30 feet where the land fell away to a lower terrace. Victor peered over the edge and saw the tracks resume below, moving west along a frozen marsh. The bear had descended, probably jumping, using a snowbank to cushion her landing, but Victor couldn't follow without rope or equipment he didn't have. He marked the location and returned to his truck to plan a different route. But when he tried to drive west to access the lower terrace from another angle, he found the logging road washed out, impassable even for his four-wheel drive. He'd have to hike in, a journey of at least 8 kilometers through difficult terrain. Victor made the hike. It took him 6 hours, crossing icy streams that soaked his boots, pushing through brush that tore his jacket, navigating by compass when the forest grew too thick to see the sun. By the time he reached the frozen marsh, his legs were trembling with exhaustion, and the light was fading. But he found her. She was on the far side of the marsh, digging at the base of a snow-covered bank. Victor could just make her out through his binoculars, the dark shape of her body, the deliberate movements of her paws. She was excavating something, preparing a den. Victor's breath caught. Was she planning to hibernate? Now, in mid-November, weeks later than normal, but still possible if she'd regained enough weight? Or was she simply seeking shelter from the cold? He began to approach, skirting the edge of the marsh, but stopped when the bear's head snapped up. She'd caught his scent. For a long moment, she stared across the expanse of snow and frozen sedge, and Victor stared back, wondering if she would recognize him, if the bond they'd built still meant anything after the death of her cub. The bear took 3 steps toward him, then stopped. She sat, the familiar posture, and Victor felt something break open in his chest. "I'm here," he called across the marsh. "I brought food." He set down his pack and began unpacking. Dried fish, a container of seal blubber he'd traded for at great expense, a bag of nuts and berries. He arranged it all on the snow in front of him, then stepped back. The bear didn't move. She sat, watching, and Victor realized she was testing him. After everything, the cub's death, her desperate grief, the days of absence, she was deciding whether to trust him again. "I'm sorry," Victor said, his voice raw. "I'm sorry I couldn't save your baby. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner, but I'm here now, and I'll keep coming back, every day, until the snow gets too deep, or you tell me to leave, whatever you need." The wind moved across the marsh, carrying his words, his scent, his intention. The bear remained still, a dark statue against the white landscape. And then, slowly, she rose. She walked toward him, not quickly, not with eagerness, but with the careful deliberation of someone making a choice they can't take back. She crossed the marsh, her paws breaking through the crust of frozen sedge, and stopped 10 feet from where Victor stood, closer than she'd ever been. Close enough that he could see the individual guard hairs on her shoulders, the way her breath steamed in the cold, the scars from her fight with the male overlaid on older scars from a lifetime of survival. She looked at the food, then at Victor, and sat. Victor felt tears freeze on his cheeks. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." She ate. Not cautiously, not with the painful slowness of starvation, but steadily, methodically, the way a living creature eats when it's decided to keep living. When she finished, she didn't retreat immediately. She sat for a while, digesting, and Victor sat too, cross-legged in the snow, keeping his hands visible, his posture unthreatening. The sun set. The temperature plummeted. The first stars emerged in a sky so clear it looked brittle, as if it might shatter and rain down shards of frozen light. And Victor and the bear remained there, two figures in a vast wilderness, connected by something that had no name but was nonetheless real. Finally, the bear rose and began to walk back toward her excavation. She paused once, looked over her shoulder at Victor, then continued. Victor stood, his joints stiff from the cold. "I'll come back," he called after her, "tomorrow." The bear disappeared into the gathering darkness, and Victor began the long hike back to his truck. But he'd underestimated the difficulty of navigating at night. Without adequate light, he lost the trail within the first kilometer. He tried to backtrack, to find his own footprints, but fresh snow had begun to fall, erasing his marks. The temperature dropped to -25. His flashlight died, and Victor realized with cold clarity that he might die out here. He kept walking, driven by stubbornness more than sense, but within another hour his legs were shaking uncontrollably. The cold was moving from discomfort to danger. He could feel it in his fingers, his toes, the way his thoughts were beginning to slow and blur. He needed to stop, to build a fire, to survive the night and try again at dawn. He found a deadfall similar to the one where he'd first sheltered the bear and crawled beneath it. He had waterproof matches in his pack, thank God, and managed to gather enough dry wood from under the log to start a small fire. The flames were pitiful, barely enough to warm his hands, but they were life. Victor huddled against the fire, feeding it carefully, and tried not to think about the irony of freezing to death while trying to save a bear from the same fate. His daughters' faces kept appearing in his mind. Who would tell them? How long would it take for someone to find his body? And then he heard movement in the darkness beyond the firelight. Victor's hand found his rifle. Who's there? A shape materialized from the shadows, huge, dark, moving with purpose. The bear. Victor's heart seized. Had she followed him? How? Why? Was she hungry again? Aggressive? Had his vulnerability triggered some predatory instinct? But the bear didn't approach the fire. She circled the deadfall once, her nose working, assessing the situation. Then she lay down on the far side of the log, facing outward, her back to Victor's fire. She was standing guard. Victor stared in disbelief. The bear, the same animal he'd been trying to save, who just lost her cub, who should have been focused entirely on her own survival, had followed him through the night forest and positioned herself between him and whatever threats the darkness might hold. "Why?" Victor whispered. The bear's ear swiveled toward his voice, but she didn't turn. She simply lay there, massive and implacable, her presence somehow making the small pool of firelight feel safer. Victor fed the fire and watched the bear's silhouette against the snow. He thought about debts and obligations, about the strange algebra of rescue, where sometimes the saved become the saviors. He thought about his wife, dead 3 years, and how he'd failed to protect her from the cancer that took her. He thought about his daughters, alive and safe in the city, and about this bear who'd chosen, against all logic, to protect him. "Thank you," he said finally, knowing she couldn't understand the words, but hoping she might understand the tone. The bear's tail twitched once. That was all. They spent the night that way, man and bear, fire and fur, 2 unlikely survivors sharing the darkness. And when dawn came, pale and cold, the bear rose, shook the snow from her coat, and began walking. Victor followed, and this time she led him directly back to the logging road, to his truck, as if she'd known all along where it was. She stopped at the edge of the clearing and sat. Victor approached slowly, reached into his truck for the last of his food, and set it down 20 feet from where she waited. "I'll be back tonight," he said, "with more." The bear watched him climb into the truck, watched him start the engine. And as Victor drove away, he saw her in his rearview mirror, sitting in the snow, growing smaller but never disappearing, a dark point of determination in an endless white landscape. Part 5. Resolution and Renewal. Winter came in full force after that night. The temperature dropped below -30 and stayed there. Snow fell in sheets, obliterating roads, burying the forest in silence. Victor drove north every day, sometimes twice a day, even when his daughters called from the city and begged him to stop, to let nature take its course, to come home before he killed himself in a blizzard. But he couldn't stop. The proposition had evolved into something else, something beyond survival or even kindness. It had become a covenant. The bear had saved his life in the darkness, and Victor would honor that debt every day until the snow melted or one of them died. The bear was thriving. Victor could see it in her movements, in the way she approached the food now with confidence instead of desperation. She'd gained weight, not enough to fully prepare for hibernation, but enough to survive the winter actively, hunting when she could, accepting Victor's offerings when she couldn't. The den she'd been excavating remained unused. She'd apparently decided to weather the cold above ground, a risky but not impossible strategy. They developed a routine. Victor would arrive at the marsh around dawn and whistle 3 times. The bear would emerge from whichever thicket she'd sheltered in the night before and meet him at the same spot near the frozen creek. He'd lay out the food, she'd eat. Then they'd sit together for 15 or 20 minutes, not interacting, just existing in each other's presence before she'd fade back into the forest and Victor would begin the long drive home. Other people started to notice. The butcher who'd been quietly supplying Victor with scraps began asking questions. A few locals who'd seen Victor's truck parked at odd hours on the logging road grew curious. And one morning in early December, Katya Orlova was waiting for him at the marsh. "I needed to see this for myself," she said as Victor approached, carrying his daily offering of fish and fat. Victor wasn't surprised. He'd known this couldn't remain private forever. "She's not dangerous. We have an understanding." "Victor, what you're doing, it's illegal in about 6 different ways. Feeding wildlife, approaching a potentially aggressive animal, interfering with natural processes. She saved my life." Katya fell silent. Victor told her the story of the frozen night, the deadfall, the bear standing guard. When he finished, Katya was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. That's not normal behavior," she said finally. "I know. Bears don't do that. They don't protect humans. They don't form bonds like that. I know." Katya rubbed her face with both hands. "If I report this, they'll probably relocate her, or worse." "Then don't report it." "If I don't report it and she hurts someone or causes property damage, or she won't. She's not interested in people. Just me. And only—" Victor trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Because we saved each other? Because we both know what it's like to lose something irreplaceable? Because in a world of randomness and cruelty, we found each other, and that has to mean something." Katya was quiet for a long time. Then she pulled out her camera. "I'm documenting this. For science. This kind of interspecies bond, if it's what I think it is, needs to be studied. But Victor, you have to promise me something." "What?" "When spring comes, you let her go. No following her to wherever she goes for the summer, no trying to maintain this. You let her be wild." Victor looked toward the forest where the bear would appear any moment. "What if she doesn't want to let go?" "Then that's her choice. But you have to be willing to make it." Victor nodded slowly. He understood what Katya was really asking. Could he love something enough to release it? Could he accept that his role in the bear's story might be temporary? A single chapter in a much longer tale? "I promise," he said. The bear emerged from the trees right on schedule. She stopped when she saw Katya, her posture shifting to wary alertness. But when Victor whistled softly, she relaxed. She approached, ate her breakfast, and sat, Katya filmed the entire interaction, her camera whirring softly. Incredible, Katya breathed. She's habituated to you specifically, not to humans in general, just you. Is that unusual? It's extraordinary. Most bears who become food conditioned lose their fear of all humans. But she's discriminating. She recognizes you as an individual and has formed a specific bond. That level of cognitive sophistication, we're only beginning to understand it. After the bear left, Katya stayed for coffee in Victor's truck, asking questions, taking notes. Before she drove away, she told Victor something that would stay with him. You know what I think happened? I think you both were drowning in different ways, and you reached for each other. That's not science. That's not animal behavior. That's just life, finding a way to persist. The winter deepened. Christmas passed. New Year's. The sun barely rose above the horizon, and the cold was so intense that Victor's truck required an engine warmer just to start. But every day he made the journey, and every day the bear was waiting. In mid-January, something changed. Victor arrived at the marsh to find the bear pacing, restless. She approached the food but didn't eat immediately. Instead, she kept looking toward the south, her ears swiveling, body tense. "What's wrong?" Victor asked. The bear huffed, a sound he'd learned meant uncertainty or stress, and then she did something she'd never done before. She walked up to Victor and pressed her nose against his hand. The touch lasted only a second. Victor froze, barely breathing, feeling the warm dampness of her breath on his fingers, the weight of her massive skull. Then she withdrew, turned, and began walking south. She paused, looked back at him, and kept walking. "You want me to follow?" The bear stopped, waiting. Victor grabbed his pack and followed. They walked for over an hour, the bear leading him deeper into the forest than he'd ever been. And then they came to a place Victor had never seen. A small valley cupped between two ridges, sheltered from the wind, where a hot spring fed a pool that steamed even in the -30 cold. And on the far side of the pool, in the deep snow, were tracks. Small tracks, fresh. Victor's heart stopped. No, that's not possible. But the bear was already moving toward the tracks, her pace urgent. Victor followed and found a hollow beneath a rocky overhang where something had been sheltering. The cub was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably, the cub Victor had watched die 2 months ago was curled in the hollow, thin and weak but breathing. One eye was still scarred shut, but the other opened when the mother approached, and the small creature made a sound, part chirp, part wheeze, that was unmistakably recognition. Victor fell to his knees in the snow. How? But even as he asked, he knew. He'd watched the cub stop breathing, but he hadn't confirmed death. He'd left the pine tree before the mother had, driven away by cold and his own grief. The cub must have been so close to death that it appeared gone, its breathing too shallow to detect, its heartbeat barely present. And the mother, with her superior senses, with her stubborn refusal to give up, had somehow kept it alive. Or perhaps the cub had simply survived on its own, through sheer stubborn will. And the mother had moved it here, to this warm valley where the hot spring created a pocket of survivable temperature. "You didn't lose it," Victor whispered. "You saved it." The mother bear was already licking the cub, stimulating it. And as Victor watched, the small creature began to move with more energy, responding to its mother's care. It was still desperately thin, still clearly suffering from malnutrition and the infected eye, but it was alive. "Okay," Victor said, his mind racing. "Okay, we can do this. We can save you both." He pulled out everything he had, the fish, the seal blubber, a container of high-calorie paste he'd made specifically for the mother. He set it all down, then backed away to give them space. The mother ate quickly, then regurgitated some of the food for the cub, a behavior Victor had read about but never witnessed. The cub ate weakly but steadily, and with each swallow, Victor felt hope build in his chest like pressure. For the next 6 weeks, Victor made the journey to the Hidden Valley every day. He brought food, medicine for the cub's infected eye, blankets he left in the hollow to provide extra warmth. The mother never left the valley, focused entirely on her cub's recovery, and Victor became their lifeline. Slowly, impossibly, the cub improved. The infection cleared. Its weight increased. By late February, it was strong enough to play, batting at its mother's paws, tumbling in the snow, making the huffing sounds that Victor realized were laughter. And Victor documented it all, not for science or recognition, but because he needed to believe it was real. That sometimes, against all odds, the story ends in survival instead of loss. Katia came back in March, when the snow was finally beginning to melt and the days were growing longer. She brought a team of researchers who filmed the bears, collected data, and left without interfering. Later, she told Victor that the cub's survival was a statistical anomaly, but what she meant was a miracle. April arrived. The ice broke on the rivers. The first geese returned from the south. And one morning, Victor arrived at the valley to find the bears gone. No tracks led away. The spring melt had erased them. No sign of struggle or violence. They'd simply left, vanished into the vast forest, returning to whatever secret territories bears inhabit when humans aren't watching. Victor stood in the empty valley for a long time, feeling the grief of ending, but also the relief of completion. He'd kept his promise to Katia. He'd given the bears a chance, and they'd taken it, and now they were wild again. He never saw them again, not directly. But 3 years later, while hiking in a different part of the forest, Victor found a tree marked with claw marks exactly 7 feet high, the height a large female bear might reach. Beneath the marks, in the soft earth, was a single track, 5 toes, medium-sized, with a distinctive scar on the left pad. Victor placed his hand over the track, feeling the ghost of connection, and smiled. She'd survived. Maybe they both had, and that was enough. The hunter, Victor Demidov, still lives in his cabin near the Karelian forest. He doesn't hunt anymore. His daughters visit twice a year and tell him he's crazy for staying so remote, so isolated. He tells them he's not isolated at all. Sometimes, on cold mornings, he drives north to the valleys and marshes where he once walked with a starving bear. He doesn't bring food anymore. He just sits in his truck, watching the tree line, remembering the strange covenant he made with something wild, and the impossible grace of being trusted by a creature that had every reason to fear him. The forest is full of bears now. The populations have recovered. The berry crops have returned. Victor sees them occasionally in the distance, but he never approaches. That's not his role anymore. But he knows, in the way that people who've touched something larger than themselves always know, that somewhere in that green wilderness, a mother bear is teaching her grown cub to fish, to forage, to survive the cycles of hunger and plenty. And maybe, on some level Victor can't articulate, that mother bear remembers the human who sat with her in the snow, who honored the bond between them, even when the world said it didn't exist. Maybe she remembers, maybe she doesn't. But Victor remembers. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howls around his cabin and the darkness presses close, he thinks about the moment she pressed her nose to his hand, and he feels, despite everything, blessed.